If you are anything like me, at least once a day, you bury your head in your hands and just go, is this actually happening? Is the mother of all conspiracy theories actually going to turn out to be true? Well, you're in good company, because my next guest, Paola Harris, author, educator, and UFO researcher, does exactly the same thing. Since 1979, Paola has been delving into the world of unidentified aerial phenomena, forming close relationships with leading researchers in the field. Notably, from 1980 to 1986, she was entrusted by Dr. J. Allen Hynek to spearhead his UFO investigations outside the United States. Paola's literary influence extends globally, with her books being translated into Japanese, Spanish, and French. Her body of work includes fascinating interviews with numerous military witnesses, such as Canadian former Minister of Defense Paul Hellyer, offering unique insights into their extraordinary experiences. In a particularly fascinating encounter, which we get into in this podcast, she interviewed Colonel Philip Corso in New Mexico in 1997, later becoming his editor and confidant. She played a crucial role in translating his book, The Day After Roswell, into Italian, even contributing the preface. She also crafted the Italian preface for Apollo 14 astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell's book, The Way of the Explorer. In 2003, Paola returned to New Mexico for the American debut of her book, Connecting the Dots, Making Sense of the UFO Phenomena. Her second book, Exopolitics, All of the Above, offers intriguing insights and potential conclusions surrounding the UFO enigma. She recently co-authored a bestseller with Jacques Vallée titled Trinity, focusing on the 1945 San Antonio crash. The book has been translated into both Italian and Spanish. Paola is a dedicated advocate for the serious scientific study of ufology. She actively shares her knowledge by lecturing across Europe, emphasizing the importance of ufology as a legitimate scientific pursuit. It's a pleasure to have Paola Harris with us today to explore these fascinating realms of knowledge. Welcome, Paola.
Sounds like I've been around for a long time, and I have. It's been a long haul, Clinton. Thank you for inviting me to speak.
Well, thank you again for being here. And that's exactly why I wanted to speak with you, because in my own research, I came across your work, and you have such a breadth and depth of experience and knowledge, and you've walked next to, spoken with, become close to so many amazing individuals who have phenomenal stories and are deep experts in this field. And I know that you are also an educator, so I was hoping that today in our conversation, you could help educate our audience, who are largely people who are now coming to this topic after 2017. These are new, most of my audience is are people who are new to this and are looking for some grounding. And so I was hoping today you could put your educator hat on and help us separate the ice cream from the BS and figure out where to begin. And so, if I may, start with your own history. When did you decide to take up research into UFOs as a profession? This seems like a very unlikely career choice.
It is. I mean, the thing is, I've come to the conclusion that it's all been guided. And I, as an educator, was given the class science fiction here in Colorado. And the guy that had it had 18 students in the classroom, and they were trying to dump it in 1980. They were going to give it to her. She's a new teacher. Well, in 1980, it got a lot of help, because apart from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, there were a lot of sci-fi movies that came out. And Close Encounters, I'm not saying is a sci-fi movie, but I had help with Star Trek, Star Wars, especially Star Wars. So when I saw Close Encounters, and when I got this class, I wasn't interested in UFOs. Now remember, I'm almost 30 years old when this happened. And I saw Close Encounters, and then I saw the story, and at the very end, here's Francois Truffaut communicating with these beings, and he used the hand signals and the music tones, and I connected with Lacombe. And at the end, I was crying, and I thought, just for no reason. And I thought, I went back and I looked at the fact that Dr. J. Allen Hynek was the consultant, and there was a wedding. And this happens, I have to tell you, Cliff, because it's coincidences my whole life. And there was a coincidence that there was a wedding in Evanston, Illinois. I left my family. I went over to the Center for UFO Studies. I said to them, is this real? Do you have files? Can I look at them? I am Italian. I was born in Italy. And I told the secretary that. And then I see from around the corner, you can picture it, this guy with a white beard and a pipe. He had the pipe. Alan always had a pipe. And he came around and he said, "Oh, I hear you're Italian." He says, "Will you like to work with me? He says, I have so many sightings in Italy and I don't understand the language." So he bought me a typewriter. He sent me all the sightings. And then he came to visit me because I was living in Boulder, Colorado. And for people that do their homework, the Condon Committee report came out of the University of Colorado in 1969. And he had a lot of friends here in Boulder. So he would come here. And what I learned and what I understood, Clint, was that this was no joke. This is not entertainment. He was an astronomer. He had worked on Blue Book. This is why I'm shocked about what's happening today. You're not recognizing Hynek, the Air Force that worked on Blue Book, and you're shocked that we have bodies and we have craft. And here's Hynek back, working with Blue Book. He knows it's real. He knows that that the government is interested. And he was just using me for the translation. So I got to be honest with you. I don't care what was inside the craft because that would scare me to death. I had a map in my house. I was putting pins in it. He'd say there's 5 sightings over Indiana. And I was good doing pins. I was good doing the map. I was good doing the data. I don't want to know anything else because I could not handle it at the time. Now, a lot has changed since then.
What is a misconception that you think people have about what's going on right now in the field? It seems like this conversation started picking up steam around 2017, and now we're hearing discussions about craft and bodies in Congress. There's a lot going on. What do you make of it?
Well, it's either, first of all, the way I look at it, because I'm an investigative reporter, which means I've been a detective most of my life and paid a price for it, actually. I was telling you that when I was working on the Michael Wolff case, on 2 different occasions, I had car bombs go off in front of my apartment. I've been told not to talk about Colonel Corso in the United States. I've been a lot of stuff, but I always look at why the agenda, because nobody is doing it because of the kindness of your heart. We now want to tell the truth. We love the people, all that kind of stuff. I have to look at the reason. And there is one of 2 reasons. Either something is coming down that we know nothing about, but somebody else does. And then that would be an effort to explain we knew all along. That's one scenario. Or the other scenario is what I was talking to you about Adamski, that that this planet runs on a war economy. You have war reconstruction. In 1954, Adamski did a lecture in California, and he's real, by the way. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that that all of the people around Adamski know that he's real. Even Colonel Corso knew. I met Desmond Leslie, who wrote the books. He knew. George Adamski said that in the 1950s, and this is interesting for people, we had a chance to change the timeline. And because Kennedy wanted us to go to the moon and we had NASA, we created NASA, we could have gone into a space economy. That would have changed not only our economy, we wouldn't have had to invent the wars, but we would have been able to see who's out there and really progress in space travel and make money off of it, because all the things that we invented, all the making everything miniature, and all of the medical stuff and all of the technology that we did for space could have made money for us if we had come together as a planet. And so that didn't happen, obviously, because look where we are today. Today we are in a Cold War. We have Russia as the enemy. It's the same Cold War as the Berlin Wall. I have been doing some research on the Space Brother movement of the Cold War, because that's when it happened, 1960s. And that includes Van Tassel, Howard Menger, Adamski, Orfeo Angelucci, and all those guys that were contacted during the Cold war with the same message. So the thing is that if you look at this geopolitically on a timeline, and you mentioned my book with Jacques Vallée, Trinity, the first crash was 1945. It was in San Antonio, New Mexico. It was 13 miles from ground zero. It was seen, not only did the two little boys, and we have 4 witnesses now, experience that, it makes me think that for some people or some contact, it was a wake-up call. So if you study this way, and then realize that either we're trying to get appropriations in the Congress for the ET card that Werner von Braun said would be the last enemy, and I can't imagine that unless you create that invasion. I can't imagine it. I mean, after all these years, nobody's come and invaded us, and all at once we're getting money to look at it as a national security issue. It was always a national security issue. I mean, always. It was when you shut down missiles at Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1969, at one by one, but you don't destroy them. That is a warning, and then all the sightings around nuclear. For us, it's a national security issue. For them, it could be a warning. So if it becomes a national security issue, we need to get appropriations. That's the second reason. Either they know something's coming down, or we need to look at it as creating another enemy.
Do you get the sense that what we're seeing now is a form of disclosure in the official sense, or do you think that there's something else going on possibly behind the scenes and that what we're seeing is sort of made for TV?
No, it's a form of disclosure. I mean, the problem is, if you look at this, that the Air Force is not speaking to the Navy, is not speaking to the Army. I mean, who's coming out with this? I mean, you and I talked about all the whistleblowers. They come from 3 branches of the military, and they've been whistleblowers way before what came out this year. Mm-hmm. It's a form of disclosure, but I think because of my career, I can't give you what's happening, and I can't give you an answer, even though I've talked to everybody. I've talked to intelligence people. I've talked to the people that were working on all this. There is no answer because it's so complex. I don't see how this particular government, because Colonel Corso said, stop using the word government, Paula, it changes every 4 years. So who are we talking about? Not the same people 60 years ago. So the thing is that they have no answers. It's a big mystery. I have no answers. I have the data, and you got to figure it out for yourself. That's why, Clint, allow me to say that it's not on YouTube. That as an educator, you've got to read the books. You got to read Hynek's books. You got to read Vallee's books. You got to read Trinity. You got to read all the things that the original source told you, because you're getting it rehashed and rebranded, just like UFO. Why would you rebrand UFO? It's a UFO. If it's out of the water, it's a USO. I mean, why would you rebrand things? You got to go and read it. You need to study it, and you need to come to your own conclusions, because I'm sure that whoever's studying this in the back room doesn't have conclusions either. And the fact that the 3 branches of government do not talk to each other and they're all involved makes it worse.
Do you suspect, though, that at the uppermost levels of this thing, there must be some group that has most of the answers that there are to have? Whatever information that we can have, someone's in control of that. No?
No, because this is so weird. This complex stuff is so weird. And you'll hear the people that know will tell you they're putting it in the religious box. They've got to put it in a box, you go insane. You go crazy. So they're going to put it in the religious box. They're all demons coming up from the Bible. And government is pretty involved with that. Or they're the only people I think that know something are the major industries making money off this. Is just like Eisenhower said, it's gone into the military industrial complex. They know what they're dealing with the technology part. But every time I meet somebody that's involved in the disclosure movement, I say, what you're talking about TikToks, aren't you interested in what's inside and who they are? What do you think they fly themselves? I mean, why don't you study the history of contact? That'll tell you more. Talk to people who have contact. And by the way, contact wasn't just the United States. Go to Latin America where contact is really happening, and go to Asia where the airport I think it was 1997, the Beijing airport was shut down for hours because there was a UFO over it. And of course, we had that happen in O'Hare. So, I mean, study it from the perspective of geopolitical and read the appropriate books. Do not go on, YouTube and get all, rehashed stuff from everybody that wasn't a field researcher. One of the beauties about my work is that everything I did, everything in my books, I did in person at my own expense. And when I went to fly over to Canada in 2005 to see Paul Hellyer, I talked to him. He's former defense minister. He did a lot. He's a hero. He said there was real airplanes over our head. Well, did you ignore that? And I asked him, how could he say that? And he said, this is what he said to me. I read Colonel Corso's books. I called the generals that I knew in the United States, and they told me what Corso was saying was real, and more, and more. So that made him become the hero he was, and then he did his own research. So the thing that I suggest people do is study, as you said, because I have a master's in education, study it scholarly, study from the source, and reach your own conclusions. And I don't have any. I can tell you what happened everywhere, but we had this game we were playing at the beginning about reptilians and grays, and it is much more complex than putting things in a box. What do you call the Virginia case in Brazil? It isn't a reptilian, it isn't a brain, it certainly isn't a Nordic. It's a little creature that James Fox did the movie on, and that I had talked to Vittorio Paccaccini about in 1997, because he's Brazilian, he did their original thing on Virginia, the little creature, the crash that happened in Brazil. You can't put these things in a box. You cannot make conclusions because you don't know where it's at, who's coming from, where it's coming from, what the agenda is. We can't think like humans, like John Mack said. It is not our mindset that's making these things happen. The only thing I can tell you, Clint, because you do a really good show, is that it is spiritually based. It is consciousness based. It is, like John Mack told me personally, for us to change our worldview. There's a reason for it.
I think there's a fantastic interview for those who are interested in this on YouTube. You can find it between Terrence McKenna and John Mack. I think they're at a party and they're just talking, and it's about 20 minutes, and it's really worth watching just for that perspective. I want to come back to the international aspect in a moment, but you mentioned Colonel Corso, and before, when we were initially trying to set up this interview, you gave me a homework assignment, and you have written a book called Conversations with Colonel Corso, which is outstanding, and it's a great companion to The Day After Roswell. For our audience who may not know, who is Colonel Corso? Why is he such a significant figure in the history of this topic?
Well, can I tell you a background story so that you can see? I want people to know I'm human. At the time, it was the 50th anniversary of Roswell. And as you know, ufology in the United States is one big party. And everybody in the world was there. I mean, John Mack was there, Willie Strieber was, I mean, you name them, they were all there. I was in Italy, and I had just gotten over a very bad love affair. And my boss says, you got to go and cover this because this book is coming out. And you have to get Colonel Philip Corso The Day After Roswell. And I said, I don't feel like going to America. I don't feel like doing this. Please don't let me do this. And he said, and then we got a fax from a friend of mine here in Boulder and said, we're going to wait for Paul at the airport and we'll drive her there. So I got in the car with Richard Sigismund, They drove me to Roswell. There was a big party. You could see they had planned all of this, and I had no place to sleep. And I didn't, because I didn't want to do it. I hadn't even looked at the book cover. So I got there and I went to the media, to the international media desk, and I said, I'm from Italy and I don't have, I got to cover this story, and can you tell me what to do? And they said, well, there is a press conference at the museum, and you just open up the phone book. In those days, it was a phone book, 1997. Put your finger on the on a hotel and see if you can get in, because they said, we're all booked. We've been booked since February. So I opened the yellow pages. I put my finger on the Sallyport Hotel. I called them. They had a room for 3 days, and it was next to Colonel Corso. So I went, I threw my gear. I was doing my own movies and my own photographs. I have a beautiful picture I'm going to send you of me and Colonel Corso that was taken. Nobody's ever seen it. It was in my room, because I was in the room next to it. So I went to the press conference, and I'm standing there and I don't know what to do, because I don't even know what he looks like. I mean, I have no idea. So this blonde guy comes up to me and says, your tag says you're from Italy. And I said, yeah. And he goes, ask my father a question in Italian. I said, is that your father? And he goes, yes. And I said, well, no, all cameras are pointed towards me. I don't want to do it. And he took his hand, he pushed me into the crowd. And I looked at the microphone, and I just said in Italian, mi puoi parlare dell'autopsia Santilli, which means, can you speak to me about the Santilli autopsy footage? And he looked at me and he said, that's a good question. He said, I saw that footage, he said, and what I had, he said, as part of the artifacts was a huge black lens. And he says, because if you remember that, we dealt with the autopsy footage, by the way, the original autopsy footage in Italy, because my boss bought it. So he said, because it was peeled off the eye, we realized that it was a lens, and we had that, and we would walk up and down the halls of the Pentagon, and we could see furniture. And he said, because of that, we did it. Remember, this is only Army, because when I talk about these whistleblowers, they belong to either Army, Air Force, or Navy, and they don't talk to each other. So Colonel Corso said that the artifacts and all that were for the benefit. And of course, it's Army contracts, it's money. It's what it is today.
So back up for just a second, because I think people who don't know who Colonel Corso is aren't maybe not can't take on board how significant of a figure he is. Can you back up and tell us a little bit about his history?
Okay. Colonel Corso's history was that he was from Pennsylvania. He joined the Army. He joined the intelligence community. He was the head of intelligence in Rome during World War II. For people that are older, he did the Battle of Monte Cassino near, because I drove with him past that. And he was the youngest intelligence officer. It was not CIA at the time, it was CIC. He knew Angleton of the CIA, he talked a lot about him. And his office was in the Ambasciatori Hotel. Then he came back to Germany. And then from Germany, he went to Fort Riley, Kansas. He was in Fort Riley, Kansas in 1947 when the cargo came through he said from Roswell, and he saw the body, because one of the bodies that was in the cargo bay, they put him in the veterinary quarters, and where the horses were. And he said when he opened the tarpaulin and saw the body of the big-headed gray, he said, kept that in his back of his mind because he would figure it out later. So he did nothing. He kept he kept great secrets. So he did see a body. He was not at Roswell. Then he goes to work in Washington. Actually, he goes to the Korean War. The Korean War, you talked to me about that at length. It was very sad because, he was under Douglas MacArthur, and we ended that war without winning it or anything. And he was very frustrated about being used as he said, as a pawn in war. So then he went to work under General Trudeau. All those guys, whether they were General Trudeau or, MacArthur, it worked for Sperry Rand. I looked at the big companies these guys went to work for, and it was the military industrial complex they went to work for. And then later, because there's pictures of Colonel Corso, with Barry Rand with all those other military guys. Then he went to work in the Kennedy administration under Bobby Kennedy for two reasons: the intelligence reason and the back engineering reason. And I didn't know about the back engineering stuff because I didn't understand it at the time. It was research and development of exotic engineering, of foreign technology. But how foreign can you get? We're dealing with ET stuff. And so Colonel Corso was a hero because in 1997, he said there was in the Army in the 1960s a tray of Roswell artifacts, even though he wasn't there, remember. And it included the transistor, the high tenacity fiber. He's told me about all this stuff, the pen he had that was a laser, and of course the night screening. And he told me how he had cash and would go to big companies like Monsanto with the cash to have them copy it. And who he would bring with him were his German scientists. So he gave me, because I was his confidant, and I'll explain how that happened. He explained to me all of that, but I can't remember that, Clinton, unless I have an audio tape, and I'm taping these people because my mind will not contain this. We got to remember this was the 1960s to 1963, so Bobby Kennedy was briefed. He knew, so Jack definitely knew. And the thing is that what Colonel Corso was all of those things. Now, I have to tell you, and he was talking about the day after Roswell in that capacity of research and development. I hadn't read the book, so it was really hard for me to do the interview. So when he told me about the peeling off of that, I said, oh, how am I going to get to this guy? I won't be able to do a good job at all. But from the stage, he said, I know you, and I will talk to you about something. And so I went back to the hotel, and he's coming out of the next room. So then he comes into my room. I said, can we make an appointment? And I said, because I need to get this interview. Otherwise, my boss, the interview gave me, and I don't know if you have time here, is about the meeting of the being in the cave in 1957 when he was the head of a missile battalion. And he really was. His military records aren't here in the book. And what the being told him, because Colonel Corso did not shut the radar down and the craft couldn't take off, and he's in White Sands, and this being comes out of a cave and looks at him. And of course, I don't want this interview because it's about contact and it's going to make him look crazy in 1997. So I said, I don't want to talk about this. And he said, you need to know. He said, I took out my gun and pointed at him. He had a Beretta, but he had also a knife in his boot. He was Sicilian. And he pointed at the being and he said, I asked the being, he said, if he was friend or foe. He said, Paula, what do you think he said? I said, he said neither. He said neither. And he said, please let me go because your radar interferes and so forth. And Colonel Corso could even tell me who he called to let to lift the radar so that the being could go. And the being says, would you like to come in and take a look? And Colonel Corso says to him right there, what do you have to offer me? And the being said, a new world, if you could take it. Now, all my colleagues from Stephen Greer to Whitley Strieber and everybody has used a new world if you could take it. But that comes from the Colonel Corso contact thing. And then he writes it on a napkin to me and he messes up everything because I don't want to go there. I never print that. That interview. And I only stayed with back engineering because I was afraid people would think he was crazy. But because there was a lawsuit against the book, he was never able to speak in the United States. So my boss says, bring him to Italy. So I brought him to Italy on 2 different occasions and was glued to him in Italy as kind of a bodyguard confidant. So I was able to talk to him about all kinds of things. And I'm sorry I made this so long, but I also wanted to tell you it was a coincidence.
It's an amazing coincidence or synchronicity, depending on how you look at it. And I think just to expand on this a little bit for the audience, Colonel Corso was the man who sort of kicked off what we understand now, and what I think David Grusch and others are talking about in Congress, this reverse engineering program that has recently come back into the conversation. That all started with Colonel Corso, no?
Yeah, in 1997, but look where it went. I mean, I came back to the United States in 2007, and some of my own colleagues were bashing Corso. And not only that, but I was told right to my face that I was not to talk about Colonel Corso. And Colonel Corso, before he died, said, Paula, you need to, he said, I did it for my 3 grandchildren. He says, the young people can handle it. He said, young people can handle it. And he had 3 boys, which we brought over to Italy too. And you know, I'm very confused because we have a Colonel Corso, we have a Robert Dean who was with me also, and he was NATO. And if we have a Clifford Stone, and we have, oh my God, so many other whistleblowers way before now, what makes this so great for me? I mean, what, like what? It's, if people would go back and do their homework and read the original works of the involvement, you know, I mean, I did the Charles Hall case, and he was a weatherman in Nellis and encountered beings in 1965 before he went to Vietnam. I mean, there are so many that have come out and maybe haven't testified, but I know that whoever's studying this seriously, and I'm hoping that some people in the government are studying this seriously, could look at all the past whistleblowers, because there are heroes that came out and discussed it because they actually worked in these programs. I mean, I can just go and say we have dead bodies and we have, you know, craft, but it's different if you actually are dealing with craft, and it's different if you actually worked with the dead bodies, and it's different if you actually worked in those programs, like Clifford worked in Moon Dust and Blue Fly, which was crash retrieval. And you know, I'm confused as you are, because we've had this, if you study it from and it isn't just 1997. For me, I got to tell you, Clint, though, 1997 made me understand why it was secret, because I thought, well, the Vatican doesn't want to talk about it because it's religious. They don't know what box to put it in because it's too complicated. I didn't understand why we couldn't have disclosure, but then I really understood it's about money, it's about government contracts, it's about the military-industrial complex, it's about all the things that Richard Dolan talks about. Mm-hmm. It's all about that. That's what it's about. It's not about you not knowing that they've been here forever. Watch Ancient Aliens, you know? I mean, come on.
I think it's really fascinating, the Philip Corso case, because he, for the audience who doesn't know, he had the bits and pieces from the crash in Roswell that he would take, as you said, from company to company, like companies like IBM, Rand, what were some of the other ones that he mentions in the book? And in your book also, Conversations with Colonel Corso is word for word interviews with the colonel, and he goes into detail about this stuff. But suitcases full of money. I think at one point he mentions he had a budget of $200 million in 1961, and he was going to these companies and he would say, here's a piece of something, see what you can do with it. And then they would create technology. And some of the technology that he claims came from this was Kevlar body armor, night vision, which I think is the lens that you referred to, was night vision. Our modern day night vision gear that we have is descended from that. Recovery, fiber optics, lasers, microprocessors, and basically the technology that has launched our civilization into the stratosphere over the last 70 years came from that. And so what we're seeing today, it seems like this new conversation about the military-industrial complex reverse engineering these craft, it has its origins in Colonel Corso. So for those people who are trying to find their footing in this topic, he's a great place to start, because it kind of begins with him, the modern era of the technology and nuts and bolts side of it and what we can do with it.
Absolutely. not only that, but because of coincidences, everything is a coincidence. I'm sitting at a table with Jack Shillman of American Computer Company, and he admits I have his interview too, that he got his contract from the Army. Now remember, this is Army, so I want to remind everybody, if we did a book on Trinity 1945, there was no Army, it was Army Air Force. Okay, so they became split in 48. So I think it was 47 or 48. So people come up and say, "Oh yeah, it was in the public domain before then." Of course, the Air Force had it. You think they're going to throw it in the trash? They're going to have crash, and they're going to take. The Air Force is going to take its back engineering, but they don't have a Colonel Corso to talk about it. So when that thing crashed in San Antonio, there was no place to put it. Neither did they know what it was, because Kenneth Arnold hadn't come out yet. So where that was, for the people that are questioning the book, Remy Baca, who worked for the governor of Washington State.
You're talking about Trinity. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's the book you're referring to right now, right?
That is a blockbuster, because it's 10 years of research on my part, 5 years with Jacques Vallée. We used to go 3 times a year there to do it. In that time, in 1945, when that happened, you couldn't take that stuff and put it to the Army. There was no Army. They were together, Army Air Force. So because it was 13 miles away from ground zero, it ended up in the Atomic Energy Commission files, which is not Army, Air Force, or Navy. So Remy, in order to thank Remy, who worked for Dixie Lee, the head of the Atomic Energy Commission, he got her elected. She pulled out his file and she showed the 1945 crash there. The 1945 crash is real. She opened that file, she showed it to him, and she closed it because it belongs to the Atomic Energy Commission, because it couldn't go to Blue Book. There was no Air Force or anywhere else. But people that are questioning that, it's crazy, because naturally they don't know where to put the craft. I mean, they didn't even know what to do with it, because we got this happening after the atomic bomb. And the idea that these things are coming to the Earth right after the atomic bomb leads the chronological looking at the interaction with nuclear on the planet. So it's very important that people look at this historically. And of course, what are they going to do? Throw it in the trash? They're going to look at what it's made out of. It spit out all these fiber optic stuff all over the bushes. The kids put it in a big bag, 10-pound bag, and lit the Christmas trees with it. They had no electricity. It was always lit up. And Colonel Corso told me that that's what he had too. They called it angel hair because they didn't know. So if you put all of these breadcrumbs together and look at the history of crash retrieval, and that it's 3 different compartments, and we're dealing with 78 years, the people aren't even here anymore. So what does the government know? They would have to do a study of all of it. And that's what I hope your listeners do, that they just study all of it. And then they come to their own conclusions, which is really hard to come to, because I haven't come to any conclusions.
You mentioned Richard Dolan a little earlier, and I think that I always like his take, because he has this historical context that everything goes into, and it seems to be very grounded. And David Grusch, in his testimony before Congress, mentioned that a lot of the stuff that's being developed now is being developed using funding for projects that are more publicly known, but they're taking the extra money and they're siphoning it off into these deep black, high-tech reverse engineering programs. And so if you think back to when Colonel Corso was doing this back in the 60s and extrapolate that out to today, trillions of dollars of taxpayer money have gone into developing technology that, from, if we're to believe even 10% of what we hear, is basically Star Trek technology. I mean, you have super energy technology, anti-gravity if you can control gravity, you can control time. Medical technology that's just 500 or 1,000 years beyond what we have, and it almost seems like there's an entirely new world that is there for the taking if we can take it.
The only person speaking about that is Dr. Stephen Greer, that says 50 years have been stolen from us because we're still in the petrodollar. It's like, and I will be honest, he's the only one I support with Colin Andrews, who have, what they've done is look at the repercussions of this, given that it's real, what we could do with the technology. And I think that it should, Colonel Corso even told me, he says, we had to take it for the Army for military purposes first. He said, but then we wanted to give it to the people. Well, come on, give it to the people. I mean, it's like, what are you looking for? In a way, it's a real gift, but it depends on how you use it. It's a real gift to the people. Give it to the people, and that's why I have to listen to somebody that makes sense, because there's an agenda behind this. And so, and I told you before that I spoke, I helped Greer with his disclosure project, but he just had a disclosure project and very few people even listened to it. And it was in Washington, D.C., and he had six, not one like in Washington, but he had 6 people who worked in these programs, including the advanced weapons programs. You're telling the truth about this. He had 6 of them because, I've come to the conclusion you can have all of these whistleblowers and it goes right over the head of most people. I mean, it's become entertainment anymore. It's become, oh, let's look at what's going on. But you have to ask yourself why it's happening now. And that I admire for you, because you're bringing it up now. And that's why you said you were interested, because why now?
Do you have any thoughts on why now, personally? I mean, what is your instinct? What is your gut telling you?
Well, again, you're either getting ready for something and you have to have an explanation, or you have to make money in some way, because I've come to the conclusion it is financial. So I don't know. You use it as a national security card, which it is, or there's something coming down, and I don't know how they would know that. I mean, that isn't any kind of thing that I've been involved in. But I will tell you, with all the data that I have, and connecting the dots is like an encyclopedia of data from the original people. It can't go on like this. Something needs to change, and I don't know how that can play out. I don't know what the off-ramp is for all of this. My mind can't wrap around it.
Have you had an opportunity to familiarize yourself at all with the NDAA Schumer amendment?
Yes, but how you can say that, but how can you make people do that? You can have an amendment. You could have an amendment and say, okay, you guys can come forth with the truth and we'll give you amnesty, and also, but then I don't understand why they don't go backwards to the time of Colonel Corso and the time of Robert Dean, NATO, and all the whistleblowers before that. I mean, they're all dead now. Clifford Stone, they're all gone. Who are you going to get to? And then the 6 that Stephen had, I mean, why don't you talk to them? What is it? Just the guy that they pulled out of Washington, to the hearings? What about he brought? I mean,
the Stephen Greer one was amazing, because and I'm sorry to jump in there, but it was just so palpable how nervous his speakers were. And it's clear that what they had seen had shaken them up very deeply. And I think that's worth something. Well, I've tried to orient myself sometimes when I'm watching interviews with people who, claim to know something, and you're trying to put this gigantic story together in your head, and it's so big, and there's just so much going on, and so many characters. And every once in a while, you'll watch an interview with someone, and they are so shaken up, and it's clear. You can look in their eyes and just tell that they experienced something real. And I look for that, and I've noticed that every one of the interviews that Stephen Greer has done with all of his whistleblowers that he has on his website, and the ones that spoke at the National Press Club, they share that in common. There's a sense of urgency there.
Urgency and danger.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they don't get a Hollywood agent and become a movie star and and a media person and everybody wants to interview. The ones that he brought out, and I'm going to go to Clifford Stone in a minute, are scared. The only reason Clifford Stone, and I did his book, I helped him probably, he didn't type it. What he did is speak into a microphone, and I had a transcript called Eyes Only. The only reason Clifford ever came out in 2000 was because his son was killed in an automobile. He had 5 kids, and this is one of 2 twins. And he thought the government did it, but it was an accident. He was
okay.
on a motorcycle.
Pause there. Back up a second with Clifford Stone. I really want to dig into his story. Can you give us the background? Pretend you're talking to a room full of people who have no clue who Clifford Stone is. Why is he so significant? What is Clifford's story? Go.
Okay. Clifford Stone is one of the people that worked in crash retrieval. Now, the crash retrieval of Trinity didn't have a group of people that worked there. It was the same guys that worked for the Manhattan Project. There were 21-year-old guys who were cleaning up the crash in Trinity in 1945, who were playing, Western music from their Jeeps. They don't know what was going on because they'd never seen anything like this. Clifford Stone, instead, in the 1960s, because he had contact, and they knew there was a colonel that followed him even when he signed up for the Army after he graduated from high school. They know who has contact and could communicate telepathically, because these beings do not go to school to learn languages. It's all telepathic. Induced him to come into the Army, even though he had scoliosis and was not qualified. So Clifford found himself listed as a clerk in the Army, remember, because, Air Force and Navy have their own thing going, and found himself in a crash retrieval in 1969 in Indian Town Gap, Indianapolis, Indiana, near Indiana. And he thought it was a crash of a plane. And he told me, I was with all the guys, we set up the light alls. Actually, this testimony is in the Disclosure Project 2000 in Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project. And he saw that he was the only one that was supposed to go up to a craft because there were 2 dead beings on the outside, 2 dead grays, evidently, and there were 2 inside. And they weren't going to let the rest of the guys go because he was part of a crash retrieval team. And he was shocked. And he said, I need an officer down here. And they said, no, son, just tell us what you see. This is all part, if people do their homework, of the Disclosure Project. That he realized that what his job was, apart from, he's listed as a clerk, is to go to sites that have crashes, and if they're still alive, to communicate with them. He's not kidding. He was the only one that cried at the disclosure event. And as I said, the only reason he took the courage to do that, because he could have been killed, is because his son was killed in an automobile accident, and I think he was angry, and he was going to tell the truth for the first time. And so he talked about the rest of the crash retrievals, and we could do a whole show on this, to me, because I was with him until he died last year, when he gave me all his files of their Rights University right now. He explained to me that 3 of the crash retrievals were in Vietnam, because Vietnam was being surveilled by ETs. So I understood that whatever group or species was watching this was watching wars on this planet, because he had interactions with them in Vietnam. So we could do more on because I asked him for details when I was with him, and he would get so emotional, it would be very hard for him to calm down. But
Were you suggesting that he was chosen because he had the ability to communicate with these beings?
yes, but so were most of the whistleblowers. Anybody that communicated with ETs, they know, somebody knows that they have the ability, telepathic ability. I've done so many interviews where as children, they're being surveilled because they have these, they'll either buy a UFO book or they'll get interested in UFO books, or they'll be interested in the subject matter, and then they're approached to become an inner circle, because that ability to telepathically is one that's needed. I mean, look at, oh my goodness, Dan Bursch. I did the Dan Bursch case, the microbiologist in Area 51 with the J-Rod. I mean, anybody that has contact, we just talked about, you said Gary Nolan had contact. I mean, people have contact. Somebody knows, and then you get asked to be part of something because that's important. It makes it part of whatever they're studying. And by the way, they know a lot more. It depends on who is in charge of this. They know a lot more than they're talking about, because the regular average person doesn't care. And the regular average person is not interested in what you're asking them to do, Clint, just like John Mack, is to change their worldview and turn it upside down and backwards. And that's really hard for people.
I understand why people don't care, because life is hard, and it's enough of a struggle just to get through the week for most people. And I think we can all feel that, especially in the last few years as things have gotten crazier and crazier. But one does get the impression, if you look at this situation long enough and you look at the history of ufology, and you look at people like Colonel Corso and Greer and Clifford Stone and others, there's a very real aspect to this, which kind of starts with Colonel Corso, as he describes in The Day After Roswell. He starts with these materials. They're like, figure this out. Friend or foe, we need to figure out what we're dealing with here. So go around the country to our best, brightest labs, give this stuff to whoever, and get them to figure it out for us. Okay, I'm on board with that. I think that makes perfect sense. I have no problem with that. Someone's got to figure this out. And if you're in the military, your job is to think about the worst case scenario and prepare for it. And as Colonel Corso mentions in his book, if you don't do that, you're negligent. So his job was to figure out how to deal with these beings at their level, to the extent that that was possible for us. He begins this process, and then it seems like in your book, Conversations with Colonel Corso, he talks a little bit about how some of that started to get to kind of run away on its own. And he would go into these companies and say, this isn't really what we contracted for. What are you guys doing here? And then later we picked this conversation up just this last 2 years, and we're hearing, oh, now these things have gone completely off the reservation, and these companies have been working on this stuff for 40, 50 more years, spending billions and billions and billions of dollars on it. And I think if people truly understood how different the world could be if we just had something as simple as free energy, and I know Stephen Greer talks about this at length, it would change your day-to-day life in ways that you could feel immediately. You wouldn't have to, just the idea of this whole circus, this whole rat race of getting up, going to work, sitting at a crappy desk, at a shitty job, you hate it, and we're all just doing this, and we're just like going through this motion to make money so that 9 guys can own everything? Because that's what it is. Like, look around and you just see, inevitably it's turned into this. It's a circus. There's like 6 or 7 people who own it all. The society is a complete mess. Wars everywhere. It's not getting any better. The climate's going crazy. It's palpable now. And I think if people really understood, when Stephen Greer talks, he's talking about Star Trek, the Star Trek world. It's right there. You could be living in it today. We could have had this 40, 50 years ago, right?
Absolutely. You make me laugh because It's so obvious. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. And what it is it's the heroes that were the whistleblowers are no longer with us, laid the pathwork for this. But what we're looking at, and I'm going to be honest with you, my kids don't want to talk about this at all, but when it came out in the New York Times, they made me legitimate. Oh, Mom, you're not crazy. See, it was in the New York Times. So I'm going, okay, if it takes the New York Times to make it legitimate, kids, would you know that I wasn't wasting my time? I was doing a service. Basically, you're absolutely right. But since that's what is it, water over the bridge, under the bridge? The big question, Clint, is what can we do now? And for me, and you said it beautifully, is educate yourself from the original sources, which are books. The original sources. Don't do anybody's interpretation of bad, good, and evil. If the being said neither, it's neither. How can we have an alien invasion right now when we should have had it when we, set off the atomic bomb? If you watched Oppenheimer, we didn't need to bomb 2 cities. We could have done 1. And then after there's the H-bomb, and the H-bomb is 800 tests in the Pacific, and the ETs did nothing with us with the 800 bombs that killed all the coral, killed all the fish. And I did interviews with people that were there. And if they didn't do anything to us there, and then we're killing each other now, and they didn't do anything, then isn't this more about us than it is about them?
Can I push back a little bit on that? Because I hear this a lot, and it's something that I've always been curious about. And it's this idea that if they wanted to harm us, it would have happened already. And I think, okay, that's fair. But if they wanted to help us, they certainly have had 80 years to just land and get out and do this, do it in a way that's so completely undeniable. It's always just out of reach. It always seems like just as soon as you crack the door to see it, it's gone. And I often wonder, so what is this all for? What is happening where they're teasing people along, contacting individual people, giving people individual small pieces of a much larger puzzle? It just seems like if you really wanted to be direct, it wouldn't be that hard. Do you have any thoughts on that yourself, or how would you respond to that?
First of all, you're great. I love that question. My God, that means you really been thinking this out. First of all, who are they? We've got 57 different varieties, including the one in Virginia. I don't think that little thing cared about what we did. It's like, who are they? Now, that's the first question you could ask. Who are they? Second of all, if they've always been here, who are they? And then third of all, everything that is paranormal, we've created a religion around, and I even see a religion around ufology. I see cults, I see people having, thinking they have hybrid babies. I see they all come from Pleiades. I see all the stuff that we've created. Humans are not really wise at being enlightened all in one shot. You can't get enlightened just because somebody comes. By the way, we'd interpret that as an alien invasion if they showed up like that, just like the day the earth stood still. There's a big long story behind that. I'm going to do a master class on that. And the thing is that it's about us. We got to figure it out. It's not about whether they should. First of all, if you're flying over Maelstrom Air Force Base and you don't, and this happened twice, Echo and Oscar units, and you don't kill the missiles or just dismantle them, but you just shut them down. And then I asked Robert Salas about that. I said, did you get a message? He said, yes. In my head, they said, we can shut you down. And then in Russia, they initiate the codes and they can't control the missiles. This is the Cold War now, 1969. We're in the Cold War again. So this may happen again. And they just say, we can shut you down, and just shut the missiles off. And the next week they put them back up again. Then it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out that we've gotten so many warnings that nobody's listening anymore. So what's the next step? I'm looking at the skies going, what else are you going to do?
It just makes me wonder sometimes why they don't, why fly over a missile base and turn off the missiles? Fly over MIT and stay there for 30 days, like so everyone can see the gigantic skyship hovering over MIT. You will get attention and it will be very clear what's going on. They're talking to the wrong people. And it seems to me they're always having conversations with these military types. That's where all the action is. I get it. We don't want to glass over the whole planet with an atomic war, but at the same time, if you really wanted to like put the brakes on this whole thing, then deliver the new world, deliver that technology to somebody who can actually make it work for civilians. And it's instead going to these corporations where, the machine of capitalism is not designed to create a Star Trek future. That's just not where it's going to go. It's designed to make maximum profit and return for shareholders. And that's its only function. And if Star Trek World comes out of that somehow, it's a byproduct. It's not the goal. And so I don't think our paradigm, I think the whole thing has to fall apart before it can be rebuilt. But I often wonder sometimes why not just make it much more clear? It just seems like I don't know. It seems like a very confusing way to communicate with a whole species of people that obviously feel differently from one side of the globe to the other about this whole topic.
Well, first of all, you just described childhood's end. I think it's Arthur C. Clarke. The overlords coming over every major airport. Well, that's interpreted as an alien invasion. I'm sorry. But what's interesting, and I don't have time to talk to you about it now. You can interview me another time about this. But what's interesting, in Childhood's End, they took the children off the planet. They took the kids off the planet. So that, our great science fiction writers have had the vision of this. If you have, and by the way, MIT, come on, some of the whistleblowers I had government money and worked at MIT. So you can't go to any of the universities and think, even Harvard. I mean, they're compromised by the philosophy of the planet, and it needs to take a consciousness spiritual jump. If the human being is more than just a body, and the human being is some kind of spirit in evolution, then I think we failed. Everybody gets an F here. It's like, we haven't progressed very much. I don't see a difference between the Cold War and today. In fact, it's a little bit worse. But if we are an experiment in consciousness raising, then you need to go to where that started. It's not about, let's look, and everybody's seen UFOs. I mean, come on. It's not about seeing the UFOs, and we don't know who's behind all of it. If there's 57 different races, we don't know what the agenda is. It's about us, and I don't even know how to tell people. It's about looking at the way we live, the way we've evolved, the way we think of things on this planet. And it's more of a collective consciousness, which is why I recommended you to read Ricardo Gonzalez's book, The Contact with Planet Apu and the Ark. It's a collective consciousness, which is a very spiritual way of looking at it, because you do what's good for your brother and you do what's good for everybody else. And that's a spiritual message that's been given over and over again. We have an individual consciousness, which means we do what's good for number one. And it could be that the free will that humanity has is an experiment to see if we can do it that way. And I've had to go into philosophy, but if you study ufology, you should be studying geology, philosophy, the humanities. Make it serious and stop getting off the t-shirts and the plastic hats and the stupidity that I see in all these conferences. I would love to see a scholarly thing at MIT, about discussing the different paradigms, the different kinds of things that could come out of the study. I don't know if I answered your question, but I don't think a mass sighting, plus I know for a fact, and I support the Bob Lazar story, that there's our stuff and their stuff, so I don't know anymore what I'm looking at.
Yeah,
so
it's definitely, the waters are muddy, for sure.
Yeah, studying our stuff, I know our stuff because I talk to the people that were involved with our stuff. I'm going, well, what am I looking at? And when you go to shoot down one, are you shooting down our stuff or their stuff? Are they getting mixed up? Or was that our stuff that was being tested in San Diego or what? what's going on. It's such a mess. It's so complex that I invite everybody to look into it, but there are no answers.
Let's back up a little bit to the 57 different species and varieties, because we often hear different numbers. Some people say 4. I've heard, John Lear in some interviews have said 4 or 5, and then later you'll hear him in a different interview and he said more. Clifford Stone says 57. Where does this number come from, and how do we know that that number is accurate and it's not more or less?
Well, first of all, as an investigative journalist, I have to listen to everything everybody says. I've got a tape recorder. In the case, and that's such a good question. You're so cool. I asked him that question too, because you can't just throw that out there. But he had a manual. When they used to go to the crash retrieval, if some of them were alive, they used to try to help them. And just in his last years, Clifford Stone said they had so many bodies that anymore they just left them out there so their own kind could come and get them. I was shocked. Are you kidding? And he said that the manual had designs of all of them, and you could not put alcohol or do something to some of these species that would kill them automatically because they're biological things, and you can't. He said it was a first aid manual, and because he met some of them that were hurt, so he said, I had the first aid manual. He said, and it was 57 different drawings of different kinds of species. Then I said to Colonel Corso, the one you met, and I want to show the picture of the Italian version of Colonel Corso, because this was a being that he met, and it wasn't like any other being. You see this is my Italian book. And that being had a silver headband with a red stone, which was an interface, and he had a helmet on. And Colonel Corso added, well, we had several of those silver bands. And I'm going, oh my God, you have had contact that long, you've got silver bands in the Pentagon, you're not telling anybody about. I mean, he's telling me these things. And then he said, he said, 52 different categorized species, but the ones we were scared about were the ones that looked like us because they could be walking in the halls of the Pentagon. So he was afraid of the Space Brothers, the Space Brother movements.
That's from Colonel Corso. He said that.
Yeah, he said that to me.
Because Robert Dean made a similar statement, did he not?
Yeah, because those guys out there back in the 60s.
So let's because Robert Bigelow has also made this statement recently, and we've heard this a number of times, that there are basically identical to human beings, non-humans that look identical to us in every way, or maybe they are humans and they're just originating somewhere else and coming here. How do we know, other than this statement from Colonel Corso and Robert Dean and Clifford Stone, are we to just take that on their word, or do we have any other evidence to support this?
Yeah, the Space Brother movement. Oh my God, Billy Meyer. I'm sorry to break everybody's bubble, but unless you've gone there, done the research, and realized the Japanese bought everything, you've got to look at the human type alien thing, because the human type alien thing is the most dangerous because they don't want you inviting them to Starbucks. I mean, it's the most dangerous because we can't, like Colonel Corso said, we weren't afraid of the Greys, the clones. We were afraid of these guys walking inside the halls of the Pentagon. They were afraid of them. So it is the most, if you're afraid of the human type Nordic, then you're going to do everything to make people scared to death. And we go into the abduction scenario. So you don't want to meet them. I mean, use logic here. I can only tell you 2 stories. I told you one before, and I want to talk more at length about the Michelle Zerger one. But Timothy Good, I interviewed him. By the way, Timothy Good, Wendell Stevens, and I are the field researchers on the planet that have been everywhere. Timothy Good was at Remy Baca's house before I even got there, up in what is it? He was in Stag Harbor. What is it? Gig Harbor, Washington. So Timothy Good from the UK goes to Gig Harbor. And he's been everywhere. His books are incredible. So Wendell Stevens been everywhere. He's done everything. But I said, Timothy, did you ever think, you met a human look at ET? He said, yeah, I was in a hotel in London, he says to me. And he says, a guy comes in with perfect features, wearing a beautiful 4-piece suit with a vest. He said, I got a feeling, a strange feeling. So he said, mentally, I said to the guy, if you're not from here, take your middle finger and put it on the left side of your nose. And Timothy Good says to me, he did that. And then he folded up his newspaper and walked out. And then I said to Colin Andrews, did you ever think you met somebody? He goes, yes. I got a message and a girl on a bicycle was going to come into the coffee shop and that she was not from here. And then when that, he told me something like that. I don't know if I've got the exact story. He said he was shocked. He was too, just like Timothy Good, he said he was too shocked. He didn't know how to react. And neither did Colin, how to react. Because it's a telepathic thing, first of all. And second of all, even though I work on this all the time, and you got to believe me, Clint, I go home, I put my head in my hands and I go, oh my God, it's real. Oh my God, it's real. Because I have to remind myself that this weirdness is real. And I don't put it in a box. And that's why I'm so good at what I do. I can't make sense of it. I mean, it's not a religious box. It's not a military box. It's not, there is no place to put this in my reality. I was not raised this way.
It's definitely one of those things that stretches your sanity from time to time. And I find the deeper that I get into the rabbit hole, the harder time I have talking to people outside of the rabbit hole. And it's almost like you're trying to communicate so much. It's very hard to reach people who aren't already into this. I know that we've been talking for a while, and I just want to wrap up with one more question for you. It's just a big one, so I'm going to throw this at you, and I hope that that's okay. Let me just bring this clip up here. In 2006, I believe, this article is from 2008 in the New York Times, Vatican City. The Vatican's chief astronomer says there is no conflict between believing in God and the possibility of extraterrestrial brothers, perhaps more evolved than humans. Quote, in my opinion, this possibility exists, said the Reverend Jose Gabriel Funes, head of the Vatican Observatory and a scientific advisor to Pope Benedict. So he's talking, we're hearing statements from the Vatican. In David Grusch's original interview with Ross Coulthard on News Nation, he actually dropped a pretty big bomb and said that Mussolini's government had come into possession of a UFO, and that the Vatican arranged the transfer of that craft to the United States. What is the Vatican's connection to this? As someone who splits your time between the States and Rome, what do you make of these statements, and is there a real connection there?
First of all about the Vatican is in connecting the dots. The new revised version, they have to, people need to get this as like an encyclopedia of interviews. And I was close to Monsignor Balducci. In fact, on Sundays, because I lived near the Vatican, I would go and eat spaghetti with him on Sundays, and we would have heavy talks. First of all, if people ever did their research and did their homework, they know that Roberto Pinotti released the Mussolini files on UFOs and UFOs crash retrieval. But they only do American stuff. They don't go to look at other kinds of things. And there are the Mussolini files, so go look at them. Of course, Mussolini and Hitler knew, of course. And so the idea, and I have done the friendship case, which was 1956. Remember Space Brothers, the human guys over here? They also went to Pescara on the Adriatic coast of Italy. The people that were involved in that experiment, Gaspare di Lama, is on my YouTube talking about the interaction with the beings in Pescara that they put in a castle. The Vatican was involved. They would have to be involved. Console Pergo was involved with it. He names, if you read Mass Contacts, if you read 50 Years of Friendship or Amicizia, the names of the cardinals are there. The names of all the cardinals in the Vatican are there. It's just that people don't connect the dots and they don't say 1956, there was this going on in Italy. Before that, 1945 and 44, Mussolini. So they don't look at it with a historical perspective. Now, you asked me about Father Funes, and I was very much interested because he wasn't the only one that came out with that. Father Funes is from Argentina, like the Pope is. They're very broad-minded. These are Latin American popes and people. And I feel that Funes, to come out with that, was getting ready for some event. Otherwise, why come out with that? I mean, why bother? I mean, if they do it today, I'll be really wondering why. Did they think there would be an event they'd have to explain? So in the meantime, they're going, we always knew. So what he's saying, because this is a matter of faith and Christianity, is, yeah, and he's not talking about grace. They're like us. God created people on other planets. Get a clue. I mean, don't say this is the only intelligent species, because I don't go there. Intelligent. But, Balducci used to say, Paula, he said, I'm an exorcist. He said, the devil doesn't need UFOs. He said, not only that, because he knew it was dimensional. He knew that a lot of experiences people were having, that especially the negative ones, had nothing to do with ETs. So what we're looking at is, if somebody's making a statement, your question should be why and why now. Those two things. And then you have to figure it out. I mean, nobody came to tell me why, but I have to follow the breadcrumbs.
Do you separate the dimensional aspect from the nuts and bolts UFO aspect? In other words, do you think that these are two separate things that are both happening at the same time? Or are some of these beings coming from distant planets that are physical, that we could walk on, you and I, if we could go there, and other beings are coming from a different dimension? How do you make sense of that?
You ask such good questions. It's all the above. It is all of it. Some are coming from other planets. Some are interdimensional. Some are, some are not have anything to do with ETs. Some are ghosts. The paranormal is mixed up with this, and because it seems to be the thing to do to blame it all on ETs, the whole, abduction scenario stuff could be all mixed up with, I mean, that if we have, dimensionality with paranormal, we have voodoo, we have all kinds of other things. Balducci told me, he deals with demonology. So these are dimensional mysteries, and some of these get blamed on ETs. But then you have to ask yourself, why would they do that? They'd have to have a reason. They're not going to just pick somebody and torture them. So the thing is that we have to look at the ultimate message, or we look at the ultimate result. If they came to scare you to death and warn everybody and stuff like that, that is the ultimate product. You have to look at where that comes from. If they came to warn you not to use an atomic bomb, then you better pay attention. If they came to warn you that things need to change ecologically, and I'm going to add that to you, Clint, that the messages that I've worked in Latin America the last 3 years are all about the lack of water, the change of climate, and the fact that we need to pay attention to global warming. This is coming out of Latin America, but nobody wants to look at any other country but the United States.
Well, can you go explain? I wanted to end on that note, because I think that's a great place to leave this conversation. And I was hoping that you could tell us what's wrong with the American view, and how do people elsewhere see it? How are people in Europe seeing this? How do people in Latin America look at this?
Well, we can't say people, because the messages that were given to contactees. They were given to Luis Fernando, to Sisto Paz, to what's his name, Ricardo Gonzalez, Claudia Vela, to all the people that I interviewed. I have another book called All the Above and Beyond, and there's 12 Latin Americans who are giving us the messages there. And they're face-to-face. Some of them have face-to-face contact with beings, not grace, okay? But the fact that we have certain crises to overcome. Can they be overcome? Yes, but we have to have an awareness, and awareness is consciousness. So we know that and the last time was the Atacama Desert. I was with Ricardo Gonzalez. He had a physical contact, and he was told there would be problems with water. I come back to the United States. There's down in Galveston, down in major water, Puerto Rico, major water. They can see, they know, they're time travelers. And can it be avoided? Yes, with a change of lifestyle, a change of attitude. But there's money behind the group that says that global warming isn't real. So, I mean, it's like, wake up, open your eyes and see what's going on. We can't warn you any more than we're warning you. Would you get a clue? I don't think that what the decisions we're making are are wise for us and our children. I mean, Sting has a song, "The Russians love their children too." I mean, let's change it's about us. It isn't even about them. I mean, all 57 or 52 of you don't even know who they all are or what's going on. But the vision of what's happening, the repercussions, what we're being shown are warnings that it's about us. And I think that's the last words I want to use. We need to come together as one species. It isn't like they're going to land in China because China has the most people. They're looking at this planet as one species. And that's exactly what Edgar Mitchell told me when he was in space. He didn't understand why we were fighting over borders. He said the planet was the most beautiful thing he ever saw. And he had an epiphany. And he said we weren't ready for contact because we're still fighting over borders that don't exist from space. So I don't know if that helps anybody, but it certainly is pretty wise. Thank you, Dr. Edgar Mitchell.
I think it can be frustrating at times and then we'll wrap it here, but I think it can be frustrating at times because I think that if you approached the average person on the street, I mean, we know this from history. In World War I, there are cases at Christmas time where the soldiers would stop fighting and they would just get together and hang out. And it shows that we can do this. We can, as an individual, we can just make the decision that we're just not going to play this game anymore. And if we did that enough on a big enough scale, we could shift the whole dynamic. And I think it's frustrating. I understand the perspective that if we could just get our act together, we'd be able to make open contact and start working towards a utopia here and an exploration-based society. But it's not that people don't want that. It's that people are being interfered with. We're being bombarded through the media and manipulated to see the world in a very specific way. And it's very hard to pull people out of the matrix and get them clear-headed enough where they can actually see what's going on. We don't all have the benefit of being able to go into orbit and look at the Earth and really have that experience. And so what we're left with is a 60-hour-a-week job that's barely making ends meet, and then coming home tired, taking care of your kids, trying to get through the week. And people are just exhausted. And if we could just get a little, I think during COVID, one of the most amazing things that happened was people finally got a break for just a minute. And they were able to just take a step back and take a breath and go, oh, wow. And what did they find out when they did that? Family's most important. Working from home is important. Spending time around people who you care about is important. Most of the other stuff, not that important. And I just can't help escape the feeling that this system drives people into the ground and just grinds them up because if we were able to get that break, we would all realize collectively that the whole system is bullshit. And I think that would probably change things the way that you're describing.
Oh, it's been a pleasure talking to you because you disrupted it beautifully. I mean, I couldn't have said it that way. Just know that my work is of service. I did all the data that they need, word for word. I can't figure it out, but I'm not going to make any mistakes. So my books are word for word, and I have about 5 of them on interviews. And it's up to I think whoever's out there, it's up to the individual. It's going to be from, like Stephen Grusch says, it's going to be he calls it the critical mass. It's going to be from the ground up. It's definitely not from the top down. It's like, you look at the top down, I go, oh, it's not going to come from governments. it's the ground up. It's individual research. It's individual connection to the cosmos. I love CE5. I will say that it doesn't cost you anything to go into the stars and ask questions. And I'm very grateful to have this wonderful conversation with you, and good luck in everything you do.
Paola, thank you so much for your time today. It has been my pleasure, and this is awesome. I would love to do this again. Thank you so much.